Avengers Endgame was, of course, the culmination of the Infinity Saga. 11 years and 22 movies worth of Marvel Cinematic Universe goodness! But it also signaled the dawn of a new era in the franchise. While we've said goodbye to a number of key characters, both heroes and villains, the movie has paved the way for new ones to take their place, and for new stories to be told. In this video, we'll run you through 25 ways in which Avengers Endgame set up the future of the MCU. From the very first scene in Avengers Endgame, that heartbreaking pre-credits sequence that saw Clint Barton's family disappear in the decimation, the movie was looking to the future. Barton was teaching his daughter Lila how to use a bow and arrow, which seemed to hint the possibility of her becoming the new Hawkeye in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Of course, Endgame also reintroduced Cassie Lang as a teenager, had Morgan Stark come into the world, and even saw the return of Iron Man 3's Harley Keener, all of whom could become superheroes in the franchise. So, could it be that Avengers Endgame has planted the seeds for a Young Avengers team in the MCU? It certainly seems that way. When Avengers Endgame jumped forward 5 years from 2018 to 2023, it was revealed that the likes of Okoye, Nebula, Rocket, and Captain Marvel were all still working with the likes of Black Widow and Captain America as part of the titular team. However, in Captain Marvel's case, her mission was taking place in space, indicating that the Avengers were expanding their jurisdiction to the cosmos. So while the MCU has already ventured into space with the Guardians of the Galaxy, the future of the franchise could certainly see the Avengers' adventures continuing to reach beyond the Earth's atmosphere. Earth's mightiest heroes could become the universe's mightiest heroes.
Die, spaceship!
And that would undoubtedly be very cool, as the possibilities for the new characters and new stories would grow exponentially. In the 2023 scene when it was revealed that Okoye, Nebula, Rocket, and Captain Marvel were working with the Avengers, all of those characters were checking in with Natasha Romanoff, providing updates on their respective missions. Okoye referred to reports of huge seismic activity on the ocean floor, but her plan of action was to do nothing, because it didn't concern Wakanda or the Avengers. This seemed to be a hint at the existence of Namor in the MCU, which makes sense, since we'd already seen an Atlantis Easter egg in 2010's Iron Man 2. Maybe Okoye didn't feel the need to deal with ocean issues because she knew Namor would, which could have been hinting at a Submariner movie moving forward in the franchise. Following that 5-year time jump in Avengers Endgame, it was revealed that Bruce Banner had managed to merge his two personas, having placed his mind inside the Hulk's body. As a result, the MCU now has the Professor Hulk version of the character. Given that he was one of the only original MCU Avengers to not either die, retire, or leave Earth, that surely means he still has a future in the franchise. But it'll likely see him in a very different role. His mastery over time travel tech seems to suggest he'll take over from Tony Stark as the team's creative genius, especially given that his injured arm will make smashing things a lot more difficult than it used to be. Avengers Endgame revealed that the Asgardians who survived Thanos' attack on their refugee vessel at the start of Avengers Infinity War had set up a new home on Earth. Specifically, they were now residing in Norway, in a town called Tonsberg, in an area they'd renamed New Asgard, which was potentially the start of a major storyline in the MCU. In the comics, when Asgard came to Earth, albeit floating above Broxton, Oklahoma, rather than in Norway, it led to the epic 2010 arc known as Siege. In that story, Norman Osborn, manipulated by Loki, led an attack on Asgard, with the likes of the Sentry amongst his henchmen. If that story is being adapted to the MCU, we've got a lot to look forward to. The introduction of the concept of time travel in Avengers Endgame potentially sets up the MCU for a world of excitement in the future. Not only does it leave the door open for a glorious return for Steve Rogers, should the Avengers need to call upon him, it also makes a bunch of interesting characters and stories from Marvel's comic books very real possibilities in the franchise. Kang the Conqueror, for example, is a great villain who comes from the 31st century, and has long been touted as an MCU antagonist. That's now very plausible. And we could see adventures spanning from before the time of the dinosaurs to millions of years in the future. The possibilities in that regard are now limitless. One of the most noteworthy moments in Avengers Endgame happened in 2012 when Tony Stark, Scott Lang, Steve Rogers, and Bruce Banner had traveled back to the Battle of New York to obtain 3 Infinity Stones. As they tried to acquire the Tesseract, a series of events led to Loki escaping with it, presumably setting up his upcoming TV series in a new timeline in which he's alive. That opens up a whole new concept in the MCU, which could see numerous future projects on both the big and small screen taking place in timelines that run parallel to the franchise's main one. And the interesting thing about it is that anyone who previously died may well be alive in those timelines. These time travel scenes in Avengers Endgame also saw the name-dropping of a very prominent character from Marvel's comic books, one Brian Braddock. It happened at the S.H.I.E.L.D. base in 1970 when Steve Rogers inadvertently saw the woman who would become his wife, Peggy Carter, in her office. She said the line "Braddock hasn't checked in," suggesting that the character was working for S.H.I.E.L.D., and Brian Braddock just so happens to be the real name of Captain Britain. Captain Britain is a mystical superhero in the comics, and this may have been hinting at his imminent arrival in the MCU. He would still be alive thanks to his mystical nature, even though 5 decades have passed since 1970. Maybe a Captain Britain movie's coming in Phase 4. If fans of the MCU weren't sure about the chronology of the upcoming Black Widow movie prior to Avengers Endgame, they certainly are now. When the Avengers went back in time to collect the Infinity Stones from various points in history, Natasha Romanoff sacrificed her life to ensure that Clint Barton could take the Soul Stone back to 2023 with him. Now that she's dead, her movie can't be anything other than a prequel, and in that sense, Endgame did indeed set up a movie that will be set in the past. When exactly in the past it will be set remains to be seen, but there are murmurs it will be after Captain America: Civil War. Regardless, we're excited. In Avengers Infinity War, Thanos took the Soul Stone from Vormir in the MCU's main timeline. He then atomized it in Avengers Endgame, so there's no longer any need for a Soul Stone Guardian. With that in mind, the Red Skull no longer needs to guard it or act as a guide to those who seek it. So could he be getting set up for a return to villainy? It's hard to believe there are no long-term plans for him, given his recent return to the franchise. The original design for the character upon his return was more disfigured and monstrous than ever before. But the reason the proposed design was scrapped could be because Marvel Studios wants him to appear with his iconic look going forward in the MCU. We know from Spider-Man Far From Home trailers that the multiverse will be a thing going forward in the MCU.
You're saying there's a multiverse?
We also know it was caused by the snap tearing a hole in reality, because Nick Fury said as much in the trailer in question. Now, obviously, there was a snap in Avengers Infinity War, but given that Far From Home will take place in 2023, and given that there were 2 snaps in Avengers Endgame, we have to assume it was the events of the latter that caused the tear in reality. With the Hulk and Tony Stark using the Infinity Stones for their own snaps within the space of a day, Endgame definitely opened the door for all kinds of multiversal adventures in the franchise. The effects of Thanos' snap from Avengers Infinity War were obviously devastating, but we only got a brief look at them in Avengers Endgame before the titular heroes undid them. Now that everybody who was decimated has returned, the MCU is set up for a very bizarre future. Every movie going forward in the franchise will take place in a world in which half of the population had previously been missing for 5 years. That's definitely going to change the tone a bit. How much will it be acknowledged going forward? How will everyone be behaving and reacting to the snapped 50% returning? What will the ramifications be around the universe? We'll have to watch every forthcoming MCU release to find out. In Marvel Comics, it's generally major destructive events that cause new Avengers teams to form. And Avengers Endgame definitely had a major destructive event. The Avengers headquarters was smashed to the ground, and a number of existing Avengers saw their stories come to endings of various degrees. Thor's gone out to space, Captain America is now very old, Iron Man and Black Widow are dead, Hawkeye has surely retired, and Hulk is a completely different animal to what he used to be. With that in mind, a new Avengers team, or possibly a couple of different Avengers factions, may be set to form in the MCU. A new Avengers movie is undoubtedly very possible going forward in the franchise, therefore. The epic final battle in Avengers Endgame brought together thousands of characters fighting for the forces of good. The Avengers, the Guardians of the Galaxy, Wakandans, Asgardians, Masters of the Mystic Arts, and Ravagers, including the likes of Howard the Duck, all came together to fight Thanos' massive army on the site of the destroyed Avengers HQ. Now that they're all familiar with each other and have fought alongside each other, we could see some fantastic unlikely alliances in the future of the MCU. Korg and Doctor Strange, Kraglin and Okoye, Scarlet Witch and Meek, M'Baku and Wong, Mantis and the Hulk, Black Panther and Valkyrie. They're all possible alliances in the MCU now that the other characters share a battle bond with each other. He may have been hard to spot in the final movie, as most of the scenes were cut, but Sean Gunn's Kraglin Opfanteri was part of that epic final battle scene, as Doctor Strange recruited heroes from across the universe to fight against Thanos and his armies. Notably, he was wearing the Mohawk-like Yaka arrow controller that was previously worn by Michael Rooker's Yondu Udanta, suggesting he'd mastered the use of the Yaka arrow himself. You may remember Kraglin attempting to use it in one of the credit scenes of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and he wasn't very good, but Endgame seemed to be setting him up as Yondu's natural successor in that regard going forward in the MCU. Prior to the release of her solo movie earlier this year, there'd been a lot of talk about how Brie Larson's Captain Marvel would be the most powerful superhero in the MCU. Now, following the release of said movie, she was undoubtedly very strong, but she didn't really do anything that, say, Thor wouldn't have been able to do. However, her showing in the final battle of Avengers Endgame undoubtedly set her up as the biggest heroic gun in the MCU going forward. She totally destroyed Thanos' ship, shrugged off a headbutt from the Mad Titan with consummate ease, and turned the tide in the fight against his armies. In the absence of Iron Man, she will now be the franchise's flagship character. Avengers Infinity War's Battle of Wakanda had that awesome moment that saw Black Widow, Okoye, and Scarlet Witch teaming up against Proxima Midnight, but Avengers Endgame bettered it in emphatic fashion. During the Battle of Earth, Captain Marvel was trying to get the Infinity Gauntlet into Scott Lang's van, but she had Thanos' entire army standing in her way. As a result, Scarlet Witch, Okoye, Shuri, Nebula, Valkyrie, Mantis, Gamora, the Wasp, and Pepper Potts in her rescue armor all joined forces to assist her, which is surely a setup for an all-female MCU team movie in the future. Whether it's A-Force, Lady Liberators, or a different all-female team, it would be awesome, and we are totally there for it. Josh Brolin loves playing Thanos. He said as much in interviews, and MCU fans have been very receptive to his brilliant purple-skinned villain. So there's every chance we'll see him again in the franchise, in spite of his death in Avengers Endgame. Or both of them, I guess. The fact he used the line, "I am inevitable," on 2 occasions in the movie would seem to be hinting at his inevitable return to the MCU. Moreover, the Thanos in the comics isn't stopped by a concept as trivial as death. He always comes back. Thanos is the Darth Vader of this generation in Hollywood. Do we really think he's gone for good? No way. We'd love to see him again with Mistress Death at his side. Notably, following Tony Stark's funeral, Thor handed over rule of Asgard to Tessa Thompson's Valkyrie. This seems like a very purposeful move on the part of Marvel Studios, with Thompson's character being set up for a big role in the future of the MCU. Whether or not we'll get an actual Valkyrie solo movie remains to be seen. The size of her contribution will surely increase going forward. Should the aforementioned Siege of Asgard be depicted on the big screen, having Valkyrie at the heart of it would be very cool, as would seeing her playing a major role in a female-led team-up movie. However it plays out, we're pleased she's looking likely to play more than just a supporting role in the franchise from this point forward. The events and dynamic of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 were certainly directly set up in Avengers Endgame. At the movie's climax, we saw Thor joining the team, and the start of what looks like being a long-standing and humorous battle for the leadership role with Chris Pratt's Peter Quill.
He is not a dude. You're a dude. This is a man.
We also saw Quill using his ship's computer to search for Gamora, the 2014 version of the character who was brought to 2023 in Endgame. And that search is obviously going to be a major part of the plot of the third Guardians movie. Nebula appears to have officially joined the team too, all of which makes the 2021 movie a very exciting prospect, especially now that James Gunn is officially back on board. Superhero movies always need a MacGuffin.
McLovin?
Whether it's an object of power or a specific end goal, and the MCU's has been the Infinity Stone since the beginning. Avengers Endgame saw the 6 powerful items reduced to the atomic scale by Thanos, meaning they're going to take a pretty big back seat for now in the MCU's main timeline. As a consequence of that, the franchise is going to need a new MacGuffin going forward. There are hundreds of powerful items in Marvel's comics, many of which could become the new MacGuffins of the MCU. Maybe something like the Heart of the Universe, the Ultimate Nullifier, the Ebony Blade, the Black Vortex, or the Evil Eye of Avalon will become the new important item in the franchise. We're just gonna have to wait and see. It seems as though Avengers Endgame set Jon Favreau's Happy Hogan up as an important character going forward in the MCU. Happy has always been around in the franchise, ever since its first movie Iron Man back in 2008 when he was introduced as Tony Stark's pal and bodyguard. But he will be increasingly key in the post-Tony MCU. He was seen at the end of Endgame chatting with Morgan Stark, telling her he'll look after her now that her father's not around, and we already know he'll be in Spider-Man Far From Home. It would seem he'll have a fatherly role in the franchise, looking out for the youngsters his friend Tony was previously responsible for. Of course, Avengers Endgame came to its climax with Steve Rogers returning the 6 Infinity Stones to their original timelines and not coming back. he reappeared as an elderly man to reveal that he'd lived a happy married life, and to hand his iconic vibranium shield over to Anthony Mackie's Sam Wilson. That means the MCU will still have a Captain America moving forward, but it won't be the one we know. Wilson is set to appear in a Disney TV show alongside Bucky Barnes, who may be using the name White Wolf by then, and it'll be interesting to see whether the hero previously known as Falcon takes the Captain America name in that show, or saves it for a big movie event. Having fought in space in Avengers Infinity War, having fought in the Battle of Earth in Avengers Endgame, and given that he's about to go global in Spider-Man Far From Home, it's easy to assume the future of Tom Holland's web-slinger lies beyond Queens in the MCU. However, Endgame's climax saw him returning to school, highlighting the fact that he's still that down-to-earth, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man we know and love. It feels like the movie's way of saying just because Spidey fought above his pay grade in the MCU recently and will be doing so again in Far From Home, he won't be neglecting his roots going forward in the franchise. We wouldn't have it any other way. Spidey ultimately belongs in New York, fighting on behalf of the everyman. Avengers Endgame broke with MCU tradition by not having a mid- or post-credits scene, but there was something after that credits, and it could be a hint towards the franchise's future. Tony Stark obviously passed away saving the universe in the movie, but there was certainly a post-credits hint that he'll return at some point. The distinct sound of him hammering away at his first armor could be heard, which may just have been paying homage to his contribution to the MCU, but it could also have been foreshadowing his return. Yeah, he's dead. But this is the world of superheroes. Anything, quite literally anything, can happen. And if something was to happen that brought Iron Man back to the franchise, very few people would complain. Which other ways did Avengers Endgame set up the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Screen Rant for more great videos just like this one. Bye for now.